In the previous lecture, I talked about how certain behaviors or practices came to be considered and promoted as normal by people in a given society. In this lecture, I'm going to look at the opposite, at how things came to be labeled by those same people as abnormal, or as taboos and stigmas, and the social consequences for people whose identities or behaviors are labeled as such. Taboos are social constructs, and they're tied to the cultural circumstance in which they exist. Taboos prohibit certain behaviors or acts or attributes as forbidden. Religious taboos convey a supernatural consequence, whereas cultural taboos, the focus of this class, convey social consequences. In some faith traditions, there's a religious taboo against sex outside of very specific types of relationships. And within those faith communities, there may also be social consequences for people who violate that religious taboo. Stigmas are similar to taboos in that they are attributes, behaviors, or reputations that are socially discrediting in a particular way. To become stigmatized may cause someone to be classified by others as undesirable or rejected, rather than as accepted and normal. Both taboos and stigma are cultural constructs. They vary based on time and place. Neither taboos nor stigmas are natural parts of human existence. We create them and promote them and enforce them upon one another. There are two key aspects to understanding the cultural power of stigmas and taboos. Ethnocentrism is the idea that your lived experiences, the norms, expectations, and taboos that influence your behavior are normal for everyone, and possibly they're the best way of thinking about and existing in the world. Ethnocentrism also implies a judgment of others based on their difference. What is normal for you is considered essentialized, fixed, and naturalized for everyone else, even if their lived experience is different from your own. An ethnocentric perspective does not acknowledge that norms are based in specific cultural and social contexts, but instead rejects different perspectives as bad, wrong, immoral, or invalid. Think again about Paige's experiences. An ethnocentric interpretation of Paige's story would likely reject Paige's experience as unreal or unacceptable because that experience is so far outside what's promoted as normal in our society. However, that experience was normal for Paige. Think about times when the way your gender performance or sexuality has been critiqued by other people in your life. Have you ever been called a tomboy or too sensitive as a boy or man? Or maybe there's a sport you played or a hobby that you enjoyed that people would point out when asking questions about your sexuality. Where do the ideas behind these comments and critiques come from? What do they say about normative expectations for gender or sexuality in our society? The opposite end of the spectrum from ethnocentrism is cultural relativism. That's the idea that someone's beliefs, behaviors, norms, values, taboos should be understood from the perspective of their own cultural and lived experience, rather than solely from the experience of someone whose lived experience is different. A culturally relative perspective does acknowledge that norms are based in the specific cultural and social contexts. However, these are two binary extremes. Most people, depending on the issues and their own lived experience, fall somewhere in the middle of these two extreme interpretations of difference. Let's think about some sexual taboos now. Incest is a sexual taboo common to all human societies. However, what's defined as and stigmatized as incest varies by cultural context. Let's think about Queen Elizabeth and her husband Prince Philip. They are both second and third cousins through different branches of their family tree. Cousin marriage has often been practiced to keep cultural values intact, preserve family wealth, maintain geographical proximity, keep tradition, strengthen family ties, and maintain family structure. Anthropologists estimate that throughout human history, as many as 80% of marriages or marriage-like relationships have been between first or second cousins. This doesn't make incest okay, obviously, but having sex and children with one's cousin wasn't always considered bad or weird. The sexual taboo of incest changes depending on the context in which it's practiced. Or let's think about the Bari, an indigenous group in what's now Venezuela. It wasn't uncommon for pregnant Bari women to have sex with multiple partners. While this may seem like a sexual taboo, to us, the Bari believed in and practiced what's called partible paternity. The Bari believed that semen helped strengthen infants prior to birth, and that any man who had sex with a pregnant woman had a father-like relationship with her child. Biologically, this is, of course, not true. However, the children of Bari women with multiple sex partners during pregnancy were found to be healthier, stronger, and more likely to survive childhood because they had more parental figures looking out for them. What was sexually taboo to us helped strengthen family ties and childhood survival among the Bari. Social stigmas are very powerful. Let's think about some of the stigmas attached to transgressing heteronormative expectations. Homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, queerphobia, and misogyny are just some of the manifestations of social stigma that impact sexual and gender identity. These can also intersect with other stigmatized attributes and issues, like mental health and homelessness. LGBT or queer folks who experience social stigma in their communities are also more likely to experience mental health challenges, which are themselves again stigmatized. Stigmas can also be codified into law. Think about those repressive state apparatuses that I discussed in the previous lecture. It wasn't until 2003 that the Supreme Court struck down laws criminalizing men who have sex with other men. And until this summer, it was still legal in many states for employers to fire LGBT employees. In these cases, the law upheld social stigma against queer people. We also need to think about how stigmas are promoted through normal social practice. Think about the show Friends, and how many of the characters on that show reacted to even the suggestion that someone might be gay. What social message does that send about what's normal and what's stigmatized or taboo? I didn't grab a quote for the end of this lecture, apologies for that, but in the next lecture video, I'll talk about intersectionality and how some of these stigmatized or taboo identity categories intersect with others to influence the advantages and disadvantages we all face in society.